Good evening, all of you. On the behalf of Usanas Foundation, I would once again like to welcome all our esteemed panelists today, Dr. Roger Lui, Dr. Christina Chen, Dr. Pathak, and dear moderator, Namrata Hasija. Okay. And I guess Namrata has spoken here for us earlier. Dr. Pathak has also spoken for Usanas Foundation earlier, and Dr. Roger also is coming for the second time. So welcome all of you. And I would also like to give a very warm welcome to all the participants today. I'm not an expert on China. I've mostly worked on terrorism. So I'll leave out the details to our eminent panelists today. But to begin the session, my question is that, is it the beginning of the end? We have all been saying that this kind of system, which China has adopted, which China adopted back in 1949, that is completely antithetical to, or at odds with China's culture and China's history. So this kind of dictatorial regime based system and the Communist Party based system, is it going to collapse in the near future, distant future, or mid-term future? So that is something which everyone would want to know. And what are the implications of these raging protests across Chinese territory on the Chinese foreign policy? One recent incident which we see in the Tawang region, the recent clashes in Tawang region, many people are saying that this is tactic which has been used to divert the attention from the domestic protests. Well, that may be one of the reason, but personally I see there is a much deeper underlying reason for this kind of incursion in the Indian territory. But definitely this is going to have some major repercussions on the Chinese foreign policy also, and the world order also, and the events happening in the world. The next 15 to 20 years look very critical for the world order, as we are facing many events in the Europe, like Russia is engaged with Ukraine. China is definitely coming and making a revisionist and an expansionist presence in the world order. And Americans, it seems that they have decided to simply ignore China, and just by the time they feel that it seems that China will definitely is tottering to its fall, or China will find its own downfall. Okay, and till then they just have to manage time, or just keep these antagonistic powers engaged. So these are the various questions, but definitely from here I'll leave it to the expert panelists to discuss the nuances of today's topic, and how this is going to unfold in the future, what impact it will have on the foreign policy and the other domestic issues in China. Thank you. And I'll have to leave today because we are preparing for our upcoming conference, so I won't be able to stay long. And I wish all the best for today's event. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhinav. Thank you for the remarks. Okay, so let me, begin with one tweet. I think it was by Professor Chan Ting Ting. He is he's a professor in IR in Chennai University, Guangzhou. So he tweeted today, I think 3 hours back. He said, at least in Guangzhou, nothing serious about COVID cases as far as I know. Most cases have, just have mild symptoms compared with Beijing. Even for Beijing, after 2 weeks, most people will be just fine. Overall, it should be a smooth transition towards post-COVID. These tweets like these have kind of, I'm seeing it very frequently on handles of, professors, or maybe, party carders also, a few of them who use Twitter. There are, and also the Chinese embassy in India handle also, they have also, been writing a bit about all this. Now, let's let me take you back to what happened actually during the protest. And this is not the first time also that Xi Jinping has been directly named and called out for. He's one of the first Chinese presidents who's been actually called out by name and has been asked to step down. So let me just give you a brief this thing, then I'll pose a couple of questions to our panelists. So these protests actually erupted soon after, of course, the 20th Party Congress, and mainly against the zero COVID-19 policy that was being followed. Because even during the 20th Party Congress, Xi Jinping spoke about the zero COVID policy, and he spoke about it in a way that it's not going anywhere, and that it has met a lot of success in, battling COVID. Now, protests, of course, started happening in almost 10 cities in China. And some started calling, the Western media started calling it Tiananmen 2.0, whereas some experts here started calling it as a challenge to, a direct challenge to Xi Jinping's authority rather than, the Communist Party of China's authority. I think there are a couple of things here. First, we know, of course, like I said, he was directly called to step down. And there were also slogans raised which said, "We do not want dictatorship. We do not want a personality cult," hinting, of course, directly at Xi Jinping. Now, let me take you back to, when it all started, when COVID started. That time also there were direct digs at at President Xi. And in 2020, actually, Chao Shilin, he was a retired professor at China's Minzu University and deputy director of the Culture and Arts Commission and former member of CCP. He posted two open letters to President Xi Jinping. He And then there was Kuo Yuhua, a prominent professor in the sociology department in Beijing Tsinghua University. He also indirectly criticized Xi Jinping and the Chinese leadership in her interview with Radio Free Asia. And this was published on March 3rd, 2020. Then again, we all know that Professor Xu Changrong, he authored actually a 246 word essay on February 5th, which he named "Angry People No Longer Fear," which actually went viral on Chinese social media. So, this is actually not the first time this has happened. During that time, also, Xi Jinping came back. He kind of cracked down heavily on party cadres because there were rumors that he formed a committee in the under the security department, which kind of which monitored, of course, the cadres and whatever protests were happening. And again, current in these current protests that happened, especially on Chinese social media site Xiaohongshu, it was full of calls for banana peel, referring to Xi Jinping to step down. So, and then this fire that happened in Xinjiang, many reports were coming from there, where actually it was the Hans that were leading the protest. A reporter actually interviewed some Uyghurs. They said, "We cannot lead the protest because then we will be really dealt with in a different way than actually the Hans." So after the protest, the reports have come up. Social media has there is a lot of reports on Weibo that many people who were sitting there for the protest, they were called next day to the police station. In fact, there were a few people who said, "We were there only for 2 minutes to meet a friend." Even they were called for, and we know the social credit system in China, how they use that to identify people. And people were randomly stopped on on the way, and they were the phones were checked whether they have Telegram, whether they have Twitter, or any other social media applications, and what they are of course talking about. So these were the things. Then we saw how the Chinese basically Chinese Communist Party reacted, like this Cheng Ting-ting's tweet that I just read out. Articles started coming in by saying that COVID has the after effects are very moderate. People are getting fine very soon. They don't have to go to hospital. Then on November 29th, China's National Health Commission, they delivered their first vague government acknowledgement of the COVID protest. However, it said that Omicron symptoms are milder than in previous variants. Then Chinese authorities, they did not use initially People's Daily or Xinhua to actually kind of write articles about it, but they started using Weixin and Guangxia, where two stories were at least planted. One was that Chinese scientists have confirmed Omicron's pathology is now substantially lower. Then there was another article in Guangxia where an expert was interviewed, where this professor said that, he was asked, the title was, "Are there after effects of COVID?" And professor said that, "Oh, there is no evidence." So, things like these started being planted. Then on November 30th, we actually see that Vice Premier Sun Chunlan of the State Council held a symposium at the National Health Commission to listen to the opinion and suggestions of relevant experts on optimizing and improving prevention and control measures. She also echoed the same, that the virus is getting weak, and that of course, while praising President Xi Jinping for controlling the virus and putting people's lives ahead of anything else. So we have seen that they tried to downplay the virus, and a few relaxations we saw were given in Beijing and Shanghai. So so let me come to my first question. I think I'll start with probably Dr. Pathak here. We have seen these things happen, how they are downplaying it, and also how they came up with a few relaxations at Beijing and Guangzhou, which are important cities. So how do you see that? First, do you see that as kind of maybe not exactly a rollback, but maybe easing on the zero COVID policy from Xi Jinping, who has actually led this policy personally? He's been he's been behind it. He's praised the policy and how they have controlled. So do you see that in the near future, or you see more relaxations, or you see that it was just a temporary measure to cool down things, and probably he's going to come back harsher when it came to identifying the protesters and maybe going after them? So how do you see that?
Thank you so much, Ms. Hasija and Abhinav. I don't know if he's still here for organizing this. Before I answer the questions which have been posed to me by Ms. Hasija, I'd like to just maybe share these little slides that I made. Let me see if I can do them. I'm not really techno savvy, but
Professor, I
let's.
can do that for you. Should I?
Let me try once. Let me see.
Sure.
Does this show on your screens?
It will.
We can see something.
Yeah, it will just give us. Yeah. Yeah, it's there. It's there, Professor.
It's there, right? Okay, okay, that's great. That's great. So, I'm just going to basically for the next 10 minutes, 10, 12 minutes, I'll talk about, the loosening of these controls and what could they possibly mean. This year in December, while definitely the zero COVID started loosening up, there was another thing which was happening. And the democratic world rejoiced as two autocratic countries, China and Iran, loosened some of the most autocratic controls. On December 4th, Iran apparently abolished the morality police, and this announcement was made by the Attorney General. It was carried on state media, and this was after months of protests set off by the death of a young woman who was being held by force for supposedly violating the country's strict Islamic dress laws. The morality police was apparently abolished by the same authorities who installed it, and this was a statement by the Attorney General Mohammad Javed Montazri. But then he also added that the judiciary would still reinforce restrictions on social behavior. Of course, the democratic world rejoiced because this is the right thing to do. Now, in the eastern part of the world, on December 7th, just 3 days after, December 4th, China announced the most sweeping changes to its tough anti-COVID regime since the pandemic began 3 years ago. It loosened rules, which curbed the spread of the virus, etc., etc. Now, the relaxation of rules, which include allowing infected people with mild or no symptoms to quarantine at home, and it allows dropping of testing for people traveling within the country, are the strongest signs that Beijing is preparing its people to live with the virus. While both of these issues, what happened in Iran, what's happening in China, are issues for jubilation, soon, on December 12th, Iran executed a second prisoner, detained and convicted after, amidst nationwide protests challenging the country's theocracy, publicly hanged the protester from a construction crane as a gruesome warning to others. And Iran aired the footage on state television of what it claimed, showing this protester apparently stabbing two men to death and running away. We don't know if it's doctored, we don't know, because it's coming from the state, an autocratic state. So the public hanging of Majid Reza Rahnavard, less than a month, allegedly after this fatal stabbings were carried out, show the speed at which autocracies like Iran now carry out death sentences handed out for, people who have been detained. In China, while controls have been loosened, Chinese hospitals are scrambling to contain emerging outbreaks across the country. On December 12th, the same day as the execution happened in Iran, showing that in Iran this loosening and movement towards democracy is definitely not happening. On the same day, Beijing municipal officials said at a briefing that 22,000 patients have visited fever clinics the day before, 16 times the daily average a week ago when the zero COVID was still in place. So the question here is, while you think that democracy has won in autocracies, um, have the people really won? The question is here, the essential question. In China, why are people scrambling now? People are scrambling because, well, China does not have effective vaccines, lack of mRNA vaccines. It has always had a very high-handed approach, trying to prove that its ineffective vaccines are superior to Western ones, essentially to imply that even Chinese people that, um, what this whole the crux of the matter is that even the Chinese people might have been vaccinated with Chinese vaccines, they don't really possess the immunity required to fight the virus, Omicron variant or Delta variant, or we don't know how many more variants. So in order to continue to hold to its high ground and show how superior its vaccines are, so that China's vaccine diplomacy or its so-called medical superiority does not really get questioned, the CCP resorted to these brutal lockdowns. Otherwise, what was the need for lockdowns really? So the question which Namrata also raised is that how long are the relaxations going to really last? So if we go back and take a brief look at history in China, we've seen how the autocracy really deals with protests and people's voices. And here I'll mention the 100 Flowers campaign. This campaign was a period from 1956 to 57, in which the CCP encouraged citizens to openly express their opinions of the CCP. And following the campaign, Mao Zedong conducted an ideological crackdown on those people who criticized the party, and this went on till 1959. During the campaign, differing views and solutions to national policy were encouraged, based on the famous expression by Mao that the policy of letting 100 flowers bloom and 100 schools of thought contain is actually designed to promote the flourishing of the arts and the progress of science. That was what was said. Um, After this brief so-called period of liberalization, the crackdown continued from 1957 to 59. There was an anti-rightist campaign against those who were critical of the regime and its ideology. Citizens were rounded up in waves by hundreds of thousands, publicly criticized, condemned to prison camps, to re-education through labor, etc., etc. Some were even executed. Um, the ideological crackdown back then reimposed Marxist orthodoxy in public expression and catalyzed the anti-rightist movement. Now, Xi Jinping has shown us in these, right through his two terms, that his policies and his high-handedness, be it in domestic politics or in international relations, are very similar to Mao's style, wherein there was politics in command and there is zero tolerance for any sort of dissent. Sadly, um, as I showed through the example of Iran, the other country, which in December apparently at the same time was showing signs of autocratic controls, autocracies cannot let go of the control which they have. They've had this sort of a control for years and years and years. Breaking that sort of a stronghold will take years. It's not going to be easy at all. Iran just showed just within weeks how this is not going to happen. China has not, thankfully, shown any of these symptoms so far. But how long are these going to last? Let's hope they last forever. But I have my doubts. Now, moving away from zero COVID, how does that fare for China? Moving away from zero COVID, no matter how unsustainable, is going to cost China dearly. Given the questionable quality of its vaccines, its poor immunization rates amongst the elderly, low levels of natural immunity, and a healthcare system that will likely struggle under the weight of a large wave, projections have been suggesting millions are going to get seriously ill or die if the virus spreads. Now, China's departure from zero COVID may also speed up the chance of seeing new variants by adding the nation's 1.4 billion people, nearly one-fifth of the world's population, into the infection pool. Omicron subvariants are likely to continue to dominate as they can cause reinfection and keep waves running. Um, it can also boost immunity against other variants, and this is this has been said by a lot of medical practitioners. The real threat of more people being infected comes from the greater risk of recombinant viruses forming genetic mashups of different viruses. Such a virus could render existing immunity testing and treatment less effective. It's possible that a virus causing COVID-19 could even recombine with an animal coronavirus species, which could throw a very different variant into the mix. I definitely don't want to go back into, another lockdown, but this is quite possible. Now, the need of the hour, not just for Chinese citizens, therefore, but also for the rest of the world, is to somehow ensure that China moves away from its false sense of pride that it has in its ineffective vaccines and gets real mRNA vaccines, which can actually help provide immunity. As far as international politics is concerned, China has used the virus as a narrative to attack other countries. It blamed other countries, including the US as well as India, for the emergence of the virus to shift away the responsibility. It built the narrative that its ways of dealing with the virus is superior to the Western democratic world's ways of dealing with it. It also built up the narrative that the US is in decline because it cannot manage the fallouts of COVID-19. With regards to India, China practiced vulture journalism, displaying burning pyres of patients who succumbed to the deadly Delta variant, only to showcase how superior China is or China's way of dealing with the coronavirus is. Um, Abhinav had also mentioned this border clash which happened on the 9th. Every single time there has been a domestic crisis, it has coincided with a clash at the borders with India. Of course, it has other international reasons as well, but a point to note is whenever there's a domestic crisis, it always, be it 1959, 1962, 1967, Galwan, Doklam, right now, there's always been a domestic crisis happening in China. Another one is unfurling in China. Definitely does not augur well for India at all. So it's high time that China gets out of its false sense of pride and starts behaving like the responsible player that it claims to be in international politics. As far as the world is concerned, a closer watch on the drastically escalating numbers in China is needed, along with a monitoring of newer variants which may possibly emerge from China with all potentials to send the world in another crisis. I remember back in 2019, there was some chatter on, in Taiwan, and it was talking about a pandemic and about a virus. But sadly enough, the world did not really listen. So maybe now that we've hopefully learned our lessons, we keep a closer watch, and hopefully another pandemic does not emerge. Hopefully, as Namrata had mentioned, Tiananmen 2.0 does not really happen. And hopefully, for the sake of humanity and for the sake of democracy, um, lesser Chinese people succumb to the virus. So thank you for your attention, and I'll end my presentation here.
Thanks, Dr. Pathak. I think you raised a few very important points. I'll come to Roger here, and my question to Roger is that, you mentioned about that, whenever, there is domestic trouble inside China, they try to externalize it. And in fact, I was reading a very interesting tweet by Global Times and also on Weibo, where few users were actually saying that China is going through a bad time. That is why India has chosen at this point to kind of send their troops at our border and enter our country illegally. Now, my question to Roger is actually two. There are two questions that I wanted to pose to him. One, of course, what is his take on this statement? That Dr. Pathak just said, and also what I personally feel is that uh, the protesters, of course, have been many of them have been called to police stations. They have been asked to report and everything. In fact, their families are, of course, they'll trace their families, they'll trace their contact. That's the way the Chinese work. I guess that Xi Jinping definitely doubts that there is someone, of course, from, because there are so many people who are not happy with Xi Jinping, be it, the party cadres, be it people, the Chinese elite. He's going to trace down that if there is someone inside who's behind this. So how does Roger feel Xi Jinping is going to deal with, and what is your assessment, how he dealt with these protests? And do you think that these protests will, keep occurring in China? Because though we see that some policies have been loosened when it comes to COVID-19, but that's just a small respite. Today, I was again reading that more than 90% of people in Beijing actually have COVID. So, what do you think about these two things? Is, China externalizing their domestic, problems by creating this problem with India, so that, people's mind is away? And second, about internally, how China is going to deal with these protests. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Well, I'm very happy to be here with all my friends here, and thank you so much for Usanas Foundation for the invitation to share my 2 cents here. So I think I will briefly answer Namrata's question, and then the second question actually is a good transition that I can transit it to my major points. So the first, whether China is going to use it as a diversionary strategy or tactics, I mean, to create some kind of border tensions with India to kind of transform this kind of dissatisfaction within the country. I think, well, for me, I would say that this the conflict that we have seen in Taiwan is more like a response to um, from the PLA and the party state towards the getting closer between India and the US, especially for the past few years. India has been embedded itself into Quad more solidly, and in a more how should I say that, more closely into the Quad. And remember, in November, India and the United States, the two armed forces had the Youth Abhyas 2022 um, military exercise very close to, not very close, but within the 100 kilometers closeness to the Indian-China LAC. So I think this is more like a direct political military gesture from China to express their dissatisfaction towards the getting closer of between India and China. Sorry, India and the United States. And the second thing is about what happened inside of the country. I would like to be a devil's advocate because unlike many who have been more optimistic or pessimistic about this, what they call the A4 revolution, or translated from the Chinese directly, it's called 白纸革命, or the white paper revolution, holding a white paper without writing anything on that. Is it going to be a Tiananmen Square incident 2.0, or is it going to open up the possibility of another wave of the social movement inside of China? I'm more pessimistic because we have to notice that, firstly, when Xi Jinping assumed power from 2012 to 2013, and after all those 10 years, actually, the party state has strengthened the control in different aspects, in different strata of the society. So at the end of Xi Jinping's second term, well, he launched a famous slogan. It's called 东西南北中，党政军民学，党主导一切. In the east, west, south, and north, in the areas of party, politics, military, civilian society, and academia, the party has to control everything. And I think he has done that very successfully. So the Chinese Communist Party, the party state, this is not only a slogan. They have done a lot of social engineering into that. You will see that not only they have expanded the sales, the party sales in different social or civilian organizations, including universities, student associations, even the private-owned enterprises like Xiaomi. that happens in 2016 that the CCP has established the party cells in the Xiaomi company. And not only the state-owned enterprises, but the private-owned enterprises, we see the party try to exert its control. But also at the social level, we see that the party has been go to the very cells of the bottom of the society. They establish a grid system. So they go to the block level of the society, the cities, that they establish teams, including the police, the fire department, of course, the surveillance department, and the party cells into that. So for every block, actually, they can see what's going to happen and what is happening. So in this sense, the party actually becomes more infiltrative and what has been able to exercise more effective control of the society. And I don't think this has changed a lot in Xi Jinping's administration. On the opposite, it is going stronger and stronger, especially with the help of the modern technology. All right, so China has been working on AI, the cameras everywhere, and their capabilities to intercept the messages on platforms like Weibo or WeChat. It's always there. It's not. It has. Well, it's. It didn't. It does not disappear. So I think this is the first thing that I see. The second thing that I have seen is that compare with other. Compare with the first two terms of Xi Jinping or even Hu Jintao's era. We don't see the declining of this kind of collective events. Even I'm quoting a report done by Professor Wang Xinxian of the Institute of East Asian Studies of National Zhengzhi University. He found that from 2013 to 2018, there are like 10,400 and no 10,000 to 14,000 about 14,000 labor movements, all right, from 2013 to 2018. And it's going up, all right? It stopped for a while in 2016, but after that, after 2018, it goes up again. And it's disseminating, not only concentrated in Guangdong or Shanghai, but it goes to the western part of China, like Sichuan or Gansu, to the northeast part of China, like Jilin, Heilongjiang, or to the middle part of China, like Shanxi and Shanxi. So labor movement actually is more serious than the student movement that we have seen nowadays. So if you notice what happened for the A4 revolution, you will notice that these are all happening on the campus, all right, the university campus. Well, these are young students, and there's famous quote in the Chinese saying like "书生造反三年不成," means that even if you give 3 years to the intellectuals for them to organize a rebellion, they cannot do that, all right? So these people have no social capitals. They are students, so their agenda items are actually very simple, okay? They just want to go home. They just want to have a better future after graduation. So if you compare that with what happened in the spring of 1989, we see a totally different thing, because the Tiananmen Square incident happening starting from Beijing, you will see that the whole mobilization process has begun in April, right? At the end of March and the beginning of April of 1989. And at the end of April, actually, the Renmin Ribao or the People's Daily actually issue a column saying that, well, we have to object this kind of rebellion very clearly, the party state. All right, so for the Tiananmen Square movement, we see a longer period of mobilization process, and we see a wider participation of different social classes or different traits of the society. For example, not only college students, but we see the intellectuals of the colleges in Beijing, they participated. The journalists, they participated. The workers participated. So you see there is a wide more wider coalition of different classes, social classes in Beijing. But now, if you take it back to now, during the winter, the fall and the winter of 2022, we didn't see this. We just see sporadic social movements on different campuses. So it's not comparable. And that's the major reason why I'm not that optimistic about that. And what happened for the future is that, well, I have a bold statement. I think this actually is like, how should I say that? This is uh, like based on the acquiescence of the party state. So they know it. And I think this is used as a political to form a political precursor of what's happening for the future. Because for the party state, if I think the party state thinks very seriously to change the zero COVID policy for now. They are trying to open up the society because economic growth is the most important source of the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party. So they have to stimulate the economics for it to grow, and that's the most important thing. But the party state, even the party state wants to make a turn, it has to, it has to have a reason, right? The reason is that the reason cannot just be there. So they have to create some kind of social atmosphere. And I think this kind of A4 revolution is based upon the acquiescence of the party state to create some kind of social atmosphere and to let the Chinese society to prepare for the future more opening up of the society. So this is what I anticipated now. Should I stop here, or um, do we still have some time? We can talk about that later, all right? So I think I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. I think very interesting remarks there by Professor Leo. I think here I'll now bring in Dr. Chen. Dr. Chen, can you hear me? Because I cannot see you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
And let me try to turn on my.
Yes.
Now can you see me?
We can hear you, but we're not able to see you.
All right, let me see if I can turn on my, because I'm trying to turn on my my camera, and
it's okay. Maybe we can just start, and you can if you're able to open the camera, then it's okay. But if you're unable to, then at least we can start.
I think I'm on, right?
Yes.
Am I? Yes. Okay, good. Okay, Namrata, thank you for inviting me and to this this very interesting panel. And well, I think I agree with the first two speakers about a lot of issues. In terms of the protests in China, I do agree with Professor Liu that as much as many observers are optimistic, I mean, based on the different terms, I mean, some people call white paper revolution, 白纸革命, but others, I guess, are more conservative. They call 白纸运动, the white paper movement. And I personally prefer the second term because I think there's some similarities between this particular reason protest and the Tiananmen Square. I think what made many analysts raise their eyebrow about this one is that in Shanghai, some protesters, shouted out political slogans, saying that, Xi Jinping and the CCP are responsible for the disasters, for these problems, and they should step down. So Xi Jinping 下台, 共产党下台. This is something I think that made people say, well, maybe this time it's not like the previous protests that we have observed, whether it be labor protests or protests by the bank depositors, what just happened early this year. But I think given what I have seen, my view is that I think the party is so far successful at putting the kind of diverting the public attention away from the protest. And I think that in turn will make the protests die out eventually. I think the party is doing a two-pronged strategies. On the one hand, just like what Dr. Sri Parna said, the party has been responding to the protesters' demand, which is to relaxation of the zero COVID. And I think Professor Liu also pointed that out. It seems that the party has set its mind on relaxing zero COVID. I mean, just by looking at the path of the guidelines, 20条, which happened before the protests. So I think that's an indication that Xi Jinping and the party elite have made up their mind that they have to relax the zero COVID. After during the protest, the state council the additional 10 guidelines, which is a further implementation or further call out to relax the zero COVID control. So I think on one hand, the party is set on relaxing zero COVID control, and part of the reason had to do with knowing that the people can't tolerate this kind of situation, and the other part had to do with economy, just like what Professor Liu talked about. But on the other hand, what is pessimistic about this, and this part I do agree with the speakers, is that it seems that the party is still repressing the protesters. So there's news stories about some protesters being investigated by the local police. I mean, they've been asked by the police about why they participated, and more importantly, I think police investigated the protesters because they wanted to find out who's in charge, who organized behind those protests, so that they could arrest those protest organizers and put them in jail or punish them for their organization. And this is a common tactic used by the party. The party also blamed the so-called foreign enemy forces, 境外敌对势力, for infiltrating, for being, try to disrupt the domestic society and instigating the protest. So the party is also shifting blame to this unknown foreign forces. Also, the party is indirectly shifting the blame to the local authorities. There's a statement made by the party state suggesting that the center has already set on its mind in relaxing zero COVID, but it was the local authorities' poor implementation of the guidelines that were responsible for the troubles and the disasters at the local level. So and also the reason Jiang Zemin just passed away, and Xi Jinping gave a very huge funeral to kind of in memory of Jiang Zemin, and some people said, well, that's a attempt by Xi Jinping and the CCP to divert the public opinion, to divert the pressure from within society. And so my view is that given this two-pronged strategy that the party has been doing, I think eventually the current protest will die out. So personally, I don't think this is comparable to the June 4th Tiananmen Square movement. But I think the protest, they consist of two alarming signs for the party. And the first alarming sign is that this protest shows that as much as party can use control, repression, and hardline ways to deal with the society, people can't tolerate this kind of hardline control. So that's why people they protest against the zero COVID policy. And the sad thing is that, and I think the first speaker pointed this out, is that it's difficult, even though the party recognized that it has gone too far in terms of exerting tight control over the society. It's difficult, and it will be difficult for the party to kind of shift from more less hardline control vis-a-vis the society. And part of it had to do with the institutions because of autocracies. Well, before Xi Jinping came to power, during the Hu Wen era, some political scientists would call the CCP a authoritarianism that is flexible, that is adaptive, meaning that even though it's authoritarian by nature, the CCP is learning to give some room to the society so that the society can provide functions such as providing welfare and kind of services. During the Hu era, civil society had a little room to expand and to have develop NGOs and other kinds of organizations. And also, I think the function for the civil society during the Hu Wen era is that it can provide bottom-up information. So from the top, the civil society by having some kind of autonomy, civil society can really help the party know what's going on at the grassroots level. But after Xi Jinping came to power, he consolidated power, he centralized power into his own hands, and when it comes to civil society and people in general, he preferred to have the party organizations infiltrate the society rather than having the civil society kind of develop its own way of addressing the issues. So I think the two functions, provision of services and welfare and providing information, have lost. So the party, the CCP, has transformed from a more adaptive authoritarianism to a autocracy or to a totalitarianism that is no longer flexible and that is, I would say, out of touch with the society. And I think that's dangerous because once you lose touch with the society, then a lot of problems within the society, you can't tell, you don't really know what's going on. So that's bad for policies because you're going to come up with policies that's out of touch with what people really need, such as zero COVID, such as common prosperity. You're going to come up with policies that you think are good for the society, but that's not really so. So I think that's a problem. And but when society complains, people complain about the policies being not adequate. The only way for the party is to use control, more repression, because the party has become so paranoid about losing control. So I think based on this, it's going to be hard for the party to turn away from its repressive means when it comes to the dealing with the society. The second alarming sign I think the party needs to think about, and as shown by the protests, is that there's going to be more socioeconomic problems. I think the first speaker correctly pointed out that now that the party has set out relaxing zero COVID, there's going to be more, a surge in the number of confirmed cases, so more infection, and because of this inadequate virus policy, there's going to be more and more people becoming infected in China, which is what's happening now. So that's going to, based on the experience in other countries, when you have so many people being infected, that's going to have a negative impact on the medical system. The medical provision, the medical system in China, we're definitely going to be dragged down and drained out by those cases. And that's one thing. And not to mention that, even though Xi Jinping has consolidated his power, the party has to face a lot of problems, a lot of challenges, like sluggish growth, economic growth, and unemployment, and financial problems, as evidenced by the recent protests against the village banks, the bank run issue. So these problems are going to happen, and they're going to become challenges that the party and Xi Jinping has to face. So, and I think that's my point, is that those socioeconomic challenges will pose a serious problem, and that's going to make state and society even more problematic. There's going to be more tension between state and society from now on. So I think the recent protest against zero COVID, they are just like precursors, the beginning of more tension. And now that people have spoken out and act out on their anger, I think that's going to be an encouraging sign for the people, for the Chinese people. The protests and Chinese Communist Party's response to those protests show the people that when you speak out, even though the party is going to chase after you, but somehow your demands will be heard, and your demands will be kind of addressed by the party. So I think that's going to lead on to more protests in the future, which is what the party has to face, and something that I guess will be headaches for the party. So that's my 2 cents, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chan. I think your last line, that there are going to be more protests. I think let's kind of open the floor with to questions with that, keeping in mind what you just said, because I think that's very important. Because of course, comparing these protests to Tiananmen 2.0, as like I think all the speakers agreed, in the sense that it's not at the same level. But yes, these protests happen. They happened right after the 20th Party Congress, when we saw that Xi Jinping had actually consolidated his position in the party by placing his loyalist or his loyalist in the central committee, and also at all key positions. It actually speaks about the fact that people are angry and tired. It's been 3 years. We see, like I think Dr. Chan and Dr. Pathak and Professor Leo, all three highlighted that how economy is also, one of the reasons. Unemployment is at an all-time high. CCP always had this unsaid deal with, the people. You give us your freedom and we'll give you prosperity. And that is what is not happening also. So economy, and of course the economic crisis, is one of the also reasons that we see all this happening. So we have very few participants, but let's open the floor to questions. If anyone has a question, or anyone wants to make a comment, or even the speakers, if they really want to comment on something that the other speaker said, you can do that. Roger, you wanted to say something? You said you'll probably say later on, so maybe you can just, if you have anything.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I agree with Dr. Chen or Dr. Fang on your sharing on specific, different aspects of the Chinese Communist Party. I'm interested in several things. Well, what should be considered effective social movement in China if we use, if we look back in history, to have a support at the party center is very important. The reason why the Tiananmen Square incident actually has raised the attention of Deng Xiaoping during the time was because of the general secretary of the party, Zhao Ziyang, had been very sympathetic to the student movement. And there was a possibility, or there was the expectation that Zhao actually was behind this kind of movement. So Deng Xiaoping actually, at least Deng Xiaoping interpret in this way. So so for the student or the social movement to be effective, we have to have support from the remnants or some sympathizers within the party, so they can be an effective force. But after all those years, after all the purges, after all the anti-corruption campaign, we see the party, well, what the effective forces within the party has been cleaned out. So I don't think in the near future we will see this happening unless we see the Bo Xilai was released out of the jail, or we have other leaders within the party who can combine himself with this rising social movement or dissatisfaction. Otherwise, I don't think it is. I mean, very likely in the future we will see a social force that is, able to overthrow or challenge Xi Jinping's authority in the center of the party. And the Chinese Communist Party has been very effective in diverting or divide different social classes and prevent them from working together. One example I would like to share is that you will see that the Dabai, or the big whites, or the people, the armed people in whites, all right, who maintain the social order, who have done the PCR in the white uniform. Now they were crying over not being paid, being treated badly, all right, after all this, the coming cancellation of the zero COVID policy, right? However, these people and all those people who've been in the health enterprises are divided, or even on the being put on the other side of the people who had not been very happy about the party policy, right? So to have a effective social movement, you will have to include some people with force. However, these people, including the policemen, the security forces, internal security forces, or even the military, are still under heavy control of the party. So without their participation, or even sympathetic understanding of the social movement, I don't think it is very likely that we will see a challenge to the party center in the following years. The CCP is an expert in social mobilization, because if you look back in the long history of CCP, well, actually, political mobilization has been used as a weapon to push for further reform agenda. So they know how to mobilize people, and they know how to nip everything in the bud. All right, the bad things that was going to happen to threaten the status of the CCP. If you remember, in 2000, between around 2004 to 2005, there was a time that China saw a tense relations with Japan in East China Sea. So there was a big wave of anti-Japanese movement to the boycott of the made in Japan products. So you see a lot of people took to the street in different big cities protesting the Japanese imperialism and all the other things. And the government, well, actually, they knew it and they let it happen. Okay, so this was used as a weapon. And I think the white paper movement, like Dr. Fang has said, is more like this, which is, like I said, based on the acquiescence of a party. They want to create some kind of a favorable atmosphere for what the policy is going to be for the future.
Thank you, Professor Leo. Does anyone have a question? Anyone wants to say anything? Okay. So I think I we should conclude with one, thought. Someone I know who was actually present at the Tiananmen Square when everything was happening, he spoke to the people, the students who were protesting, and he asked them a question. So when you come to power, if you you are the ones who kind of come to power and lead China, what will your policy be towards Tibet, Taiwan? The answer was, and it was a unanimous this thing, like everybody agreed with it, the people who he was talking to. They said that is ours. I mean, there is no question about it. Tibet is part of China, Taiwan is part of China, Arunachal is part of China, so there is no debate. So these were the people who were asking for democracy, and everybody thought that they are liberals who were kind of being targeted by the CCP. So, we all understand, and when we talk about the protest, when we talk about it's a challenge to Xi Jinping, it's a challenge to the party. The problem is if someone will emerge, even if even if the protests go to a point where Xi Jinping steps down, who will come? It will be a person from CCP. You look at the membership of the Chinese Communist Party. The third generation, fourth generation have not seen anything but the Chinese Communist Party. They have been indoctrinated in a way to look at CCP as something that's a blessing for China. So to me, it's not that easy. The protests are a sign, of course, that there is dissatisfaction amongst the Chinese citizen. But for now, I think I share the same pessimist view that they are really not going to maybe go further than being just protest against a particular policy again or against a particular person that we are all mentioning about. So, but I think let's see. Interesting things are happening. The latest, of course, is the border clash that we just had on 9th December. And I personally feel that we'll see more such clashes in the coming time. China, I mean, President Xi Jinping, and he's not going to back down. So let's gather together next time to have a discussion on what's happening at our border. Maybe we
I'm
can
sorry to
request
disturb
Abdullah.
you, but there is a question on the chat box.
Oh, is there? Okay, I
Yeah,
didn't
it
see.
is. Yeah.
Okay. In mid 19, Mao Zedong depicted himself as savior and created number of internal and external threats in order to elevate his political status. Given assumption that Xi is trying to replicate his politics, do we see Xi Jinping doing the same? Maybe a minute each speaker can go. Shriparna, maybe you can go. You can go first.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Thanks for the question. So I'll talk about the external threats and especially the threat which Namrata and Abhinav have talked upon in passing, which is the border clash with India. Every single time, as I was saying during my presentation, there has been a domestic crisis. Attention deflection tactics have taken place, and the best way to do that, to unify a country and its people, to show that let's stay unified, let's not question the government because we have an external threat at hand which needs to be dealt with, and you need to be confident in the forces or in the power of the CCP to lead you. India has always been a target. Why always India? Well, we have a power differential with China. There is no defending that. Of course, there are a lot of other international reasons as well as to why this has happened. But one of the tactics always has been to deflect attention by attacking China, by creating an enemy out of India. Every single time, China's narrative, has been stronger. It shows that well, India attacked. Namrata had mentioned in the beginning their Twitter, their bots, their 5 cent army has been pushing out the narrative that India has attacked. But well, we do have satellite imagery now. We might not have had it in 1959, 1962, and it shows something which is completely the opposite. Why this narrative? Again, look, poor CCP, we are going through such bad times. We're trying to help our population, but we are getting victimized, etc. You get sympathy. You get the leadership gets this sort of pride from the people that, well, our leadership is doing something against this irritant in international politics. So India gets portrayed as an irritant, as the aggressor, whereas the case is the complete opposite. So one bit of the external threat which is being created at the moment, which has happened in the past, and sadly enough will again happen in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Pathak. I'll go to next to Professor Leo. What do your response to the question?
Okay. Comparing with Mao with Xi, I think Mao and Xi are different because Mao is a revolutionary hero, so he knows he really fought the war, right? So and what happened during the Mao era was not necessarily something that he created. Korean War from 1950 to 1953, and the Vietnam War from 1955 to 1975 actually were not created by Mao. Mao had to respond to that. And the border conflict with the Soviet Union in 1969, the Damansky Island, actually was also not created by him. But I think Mao has a higher level of strategic thinking than Xi. So they are not comparable to me. But what Mao has been doing domestically is to initiate the great cultural revolution that has lasted for 10 years and was termed as the 10-year disaster in the Chinese politics. And this is also not comparable with Xi. But I would like to echo Professor Shripana that leaders, authoritarian leaders, when they're facing some challenges, especially the threat to their political power, they will adopt similar strategies to preserve their own power, to make themselves stay in the position forever, right? So if we follow this logic, we will see that she will be using this, especially some easier or more legitimate foreign policy repertoires. I mean, this kind of like a drama to kind of diverge the domestic attention and dissatisfactions towards the outside. Well, there are some soft spots. Taiwan is one because Taiwan has been long claimed by the CCP in the party machine's propaganda to be part of the inseparable territory of China. So Taiwan, if the CCP really want to move on Taiwan, they will have some support or legitimacy from their perspective. And the second thing will be Indian-China border, right? Because unfortunately, India, among the Quad members, India is a soft spot. India is the weakest link of the Quad countries. So to move on India is easier, right? And we have long, like 3,000 kilometers of the LAC, where China can choose any spot, and they can just create events like that, or what happened in Galvan in 2020. South China Sea as well is a place that China is going to move on. So I think, like you, Mr. or Mrs. Chavan, you have asked, yeah, Xi Jinping, I think to keep himself in power, he will be using everything that he can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Leo. Dr. Chan, would you like to come in?
I agree with Dr. Shripana and Dr. Liu that it's very likely for Xi Jinping, if he faces more challenges from within China, that he will be likely to use this diversionary conflict to kind of divert domestic pressure attention. As much as he aspires to be Mao, I do not think the two, if Xi Jinping wants to use this diversionary tactics, I don't think it will work because the international environment, in my opinion, is not the same. For example, using Taiwan example, I mean, it's very likely that Xi and the CCP will kind of increase conflict in the Taiwan Strait if he faces more challenges from within China. First of all, I think after Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, the party and the PLA have already kind of made unprecedented tensions across the Taiwan Strait. They have already done this very large scale military drill, which has kind of aimed up the tensions. Then for the party, they need to be very careful about not increasing the tensions without inviting the responses from say the United States. So I think what happened this August has made international community, in particular the U.S., very alarmed, very worried about what might happen in the Taiwan Strait. So given that, if Xi Jinping wants to use diversionary aggression against Taiwan, he will have to bear this in mind. I mean, you have to think about treading the balance, increasing diversion without getting repercussion, from the United States. So, given that, I think yes, Xi Jinping or another authoritarian or autocratic, I would say autocratic ruler in the current China may be tempted to use diversionary aggression when they face this domestic pressure, but they have to anticipate the international environment and international responses.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. I think answered the question. Now we can wrap up this session. Let me thank Usanas Foundation, Abhinav, for giving us the platform, and all my speakers today, Dr. Pathak, Professor Leo, and Dr. Chen. Thanks for joining us, and hope to see you again soon for another discussion. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.